Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents How to Be a Badass Detective by Michael Anderle, narrated by Dara Rosenberg. Chapter 1. The alchemist stood in front of the mirror, admiring what she saw with a calm sense of satisfaction. Important work would need to be done momentarily, but not at once. She would do things at her own pace. She had not turned on the light in the bathroom. Sufficient illumination was provided by the wall-mounted lamp in the hallway behind her. The woman in the glass before her was of considerable age, but she could pass for 30, 35 at most. She was on the taller side, trim but not skinny, and it was difficult to discern her ethnic background by looking at her. Adding to the impression of relative youth was her hair, which covered her right eye and was dyed bright turquoise. Such styles were more common among the young, after all. What really fueled her enigmatic attractiveness, however, was something that most people could not name or identify or even understand. It was not merely physical. Rather, it was the faint perception of a mystical life force, a creative vitality that shone from beneath her skin and hovered around her at all times, like an aura. Oh. She sighed and ran her fingers over the smooth, bright surface of the mirror. I'm doing well lately, but there's no reason not to do even better. One can always use a recharge, and it's not as though they are going to make good use of all that beauty, is it? Fluttering her eyelids one last time, she turned away and marched out of the bathroom to her studio, where her newest acquisition waited. There was only one window in the studio, and it was permanently covered by a heavy dark blue curtain. The walls were painted a similar color, giving the room the appearance of being underwater. The floorboards were dark and glossy. Off to the sides, piled against the walls, were the alchemist's various tools and pieces of gear that she put on her person whenever she needed to go out into the night and acquire a new piece of art. In the center of the studio was a table, and on it rested the painting she had stolen. The alchemist approached it slowly, drinking in the sight. The living presence of such a fine creation, endowed as it was with so much talent and potential. Alas, it had all been squandered by both the artist and the buyer. Neither of them had the slightest idea of what they were doing. Thus, the alchemist had been forced to rescue the piece. She alone could give it the appreciation it deserved. She brushed her turquoise forelock away from her face and angled her head to the side, staring at the painting with both eyes. It was an expressionist work depicting a distorted, androgynous human figure, grotesque and beautiful at the same time, surrounded by a swirling vortex of a landscape, as though the protagonist's whole environment was a product of his or her turbulent emotional state. Something about it was unsettling, yet it had an air of breathless hope and optimism lurking behind the shadows and chaos. The artist was a young man named Louis Domingo, who, while not yet widely known, was beginning to be the subject of a certain amount of buzz within the art world. Discerning critics had praised his early works, proclaiming him an up-and-comer worth paying attention to. And so the alchemist had come to Southern California once she'd heard the announcement that Domingo was offering one of his paintings at an auction in Los Angeles. She spent much of her time in the vicinity of New York and Paris, more traditional hubs for the fine arts, but was more than willing to travel around the world as needed. It's a travesty, she declared in a whispery voice as she gazed at the painting. Art of this exceptional caliber should not be for sale, particularly not for such a pathetically low sum. Domingo must have allowed desperation to get the better of him, and his buyer is even worse. She knew better. She was being cheap and deliberately mendacious in her quest for a good deal. Wretched people. Idiots. She shook her head, then crouched to retrieve the tools she needed from a black bag of supplies. She knew in the back of her mind that Domingo could not entirely be blamed for letting his masterpiece go for far less than it was worth. He was young and not yet well established, and the amount that the buyer, Mrs. Corvina, had offered probably seemed like a large figure to him. In fact, it was nothing. He should have picked up a second day job and held out for a respectable sum. Other artists had done similar things in the past, but even then, the thought of selling an excellent piece was an affront to good taste. The alchemist stood back up and returned her eyes to the painting. In her right hand was an ornate knife, its hilt well-worn ivory trimmed with silver, with a curved blade about 7 inches long of dark, rippling Damascus steel. It was an object designed to take life and transfer it elsewhere. The woman breathed in deeply and slowly let it out, waving her left hand, fingers splayed out, over the surface of Domingo's modern expressionist masterwork. She could feel the force of its vitality. Her skin tingled. When a person stooped to the abysmal level of exchanging money for true art, they killed that art. They revealed their own crassness, ignorance, and crudity, and their lack of ability to appreciate the life essence and creative spark contained within the work. Since such Philistines could not appreciate the vitality anyway, they were not using it. So the alchemist did not feel she was stealing anything. A few people had told her otherwise, that theft was theft, but she had ignored them. Now, she said, to make manifest to the eye what is already obvious to the spirit. Her knife hand plunged downward, forward, and then up. The blade punctured the canvas and sliced it apart, ripped it to shreds. In the space of 100 seconds, Louis Domingo's painting lay in jagged and tattered pieces upon the table. In particular, the alchemist had obliterated the humanoid figure at the center of the composition. As the knife destroyed the painting's physical form, she imagined its ethereal, eternal form flowing into her and rejuvenating her with its mixture of vivacious warmth and powerful coldness. Each cut of the knife gave her a visceral, nearly childish satisfaction, a sense of getting away with something naughty. But the part of her that was older, far older, knew that it was the right thing to do. Finally, it was done. The painting was destroyed, and the alchemist felt good, as though she had spent all day getting exercise and fresh air, followed by a healthy meal and a nice soak in a jacuzzi. Furthermore, she felt inspired. The alchemist left the knife sitting atop the ravaged canvas and turned to another canvas, blank, upon an easel near the northwest corner of the studio. Brushes and oil paints had been set up beside it since she had expected the current rush of motivation to begin a new work of her own. As her hands moved over the empty surface, filling it with colors and patterns, her mind went wild with fantasies of Domingo's genius flowing through her, guiding her brushstrokes. The painting that began to materialize bore more than a passing resemblance to the one that had laid on her table moments before. But it would not be identical. Insofar as the creative spark was being channeled through her, it would be her own work. She painted for 3 hours without stopping or resting, and barely paused to appraise what she had done. During the final half hour, though, her mind started to wander to the next important task she had to undertake, returning the painting to its owner. The alchemist smirked. Each time she helped herself to a piece of artwork some fool had destroyed through their greed, she made a point of delivering its remains to those same fools. The painting was worthless to them after having been bartered for like a mule or cart full of groceries, so the alchemist's knife simply emphasized the obvious. And Mrs. Corvina deserved to have that emphasized as much as possible. The alchemist sighed as she finished painting for the evening. Too bad about Domingo, though. Perhaps one day he will learn not to sell himself short. Kera MacDonagh had finally ended her employment at the Mermaid last week. However, she had known as well as everyone else had that it would not be a clean break. Her presence there would be phased out, gradually. "Kera," announced Jennifer, her former fellow bartender, as she strode through the front door. "Welcome back. Again. Like you actually planned on leaving us behind for more than a week at a time. Ha ha." Kera smiled and advanced past the array of dining tables toward the bar. She was wearing her riding leathers, which clung to her slim frame atop her regular clothes, but had removed her shiny black motorcycle helmet before she came in. Her hair, naturally blonde but dyed black, spilled across her face, then she brushed it aside. "Hi again," she said. "I had some time, and I was in the neighborhood, so I figured I would stop by and say hello. Maybe have a quick drink and a bite to eat." What she had said was mostly true. However, she also needed to talk to Stephanie, and would prefer to do so in person rather than over the phone or via text. Jen gave her a squint of fake disapproval. "Well, if you plan to order food, why'd you come up to the bar? Have some manners, woman, and get yourself a table." "Yeah, sure, whatever," Kera chuckled. "Actually, do you have any extra appetizers back there? Or a bowl of nuts or pretzels is fine. I'm not eating as much lately as I used to. Oh, and I'll have a beer. Whatever you have on hand." Jen fetched her some pretzels and a bottle of nice seasonal ale. Kera then listened as Jen related what all had been happening at the place since her departure. Kera noticed a slim, 30-ish man with dark hair and eyes rushing between the tables out front and the kitchen area in the back. "Who's he?" "Oh," said Jen, "that's Arash. Kevin hired him a few days ago. He bounces back and forth between washing dishes, bussing tables, and bringing out food and drinks when the waitresses are busy, since he's got experience with all of the above." Jennifer flagged the man down and told him to come out and talk when he got a minute or two. He was in a hurry, but nodded his agreement. "He's pretty cool so far," Jen added. "One thing I'll say for Kevin is that he knows how to hire people who aren't incompetent or complete assholes, unlike some other bosses I've had in the past." Kera agreed, though her thoughts turned inward. Soon she would be running a business of her own, and the question of who to hire, who to trust, weighed heavily on her. She already had a core crew, but there might come a time when outsiders had to be brought in to help with the mundane legwork and paperwork. Stephanie and Arash appeared more or less simultaneously. Kera and Steph hugged. Then the new guy introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Kera." She shook his hand. "I used to bartend here. I quit right before you started." "Oh?" He seemed genuinely curious. "What made you leave? This seems like a pretty good place." To Kira's annoyance, Jennifer answered on her behalf. "Entrepreneurship, isn't it? Our girl's gonna be a businesswoman. How will you get the startup capital, though?" "Damn it, Jen," Kera lamented in her mind. "That's exactly what I do not want to talk about right now. Not to mention you're putting me on the spot." Kera had never divulged to any of these people how rich her parents were. Her former co-workers all struggled to make ends meet, let alone get beyond living paycheck to paycheck, so the last thing they'd want to hear about was Kira's inheritance. Of all of them, only Stephanie knew the truth, and Kera had to hope she wouldn't blab if Kera told a little white lie. Kera cleared her throat. "Well, I was having trouble with that part also. So I accepted an internship with a detective agency. They're a small company, just getting started themselves, really. So in a way, I'll be one of the people who helps the place get off the ground. That's the plan, anyway." Stephanie gave her a weird look but kept her mouth shut. To seal the deal, Kera sent her expanded consciousness toward her friend, conjuring up a wave of emotional signals meant to convey anticipation. She did not yet know how to beam thoughts into other people's heads, but she could influence their feelings in ways that usually got the point across. "Huh," Jen replied. "Yeah, that's one way to do it. What kind of agency are they exactly?" Kera spread her hands. "I'm not sure. We're still working on that part. Ideally, I want to take on cases that are, big and significant. The kind of stuff I can tell my grandkids about, if I have any, and that would get mentioned in documentaries. Especially if I'm doing good in the world. It would be a lot more fulfilling than devoting my time to petty stuff like spying on someone's cheating significant other or figuring out if an employee is going truant and misusing company funds or whatnot." Jen nodded as she worked on a drink for one of her customers. "Sounds about right. You're the type who seems to want to do important things. What's the word I'm looking for? Grandiose. That's it. Something grandiose." Arash snapped his fingers, his eyebrows rising, and his face lighting up. "That is a great idea. Like the UFO landing at Roswell. You can investigate that. Figure out what really happened. Say your client is the American people and ask everyone in the country to mail you 1 cent for it. You would be rich." Kera laughed. "That would be interesting, and maybe worth a shot. I don't think our government would like it very much, though. You know how the feds get with people who disagree with them, hold them to standards, or expect them to divulge information. Last thing I need is the men in black coming to my door." And she thought, but did not say aloud, especially since I'm already guilty of multiple felonies as part of my career as a vigilante. I'm sure the warrant for Motorcycle Man's arrest is still 100% active. Arash's smile dimmed, but he was clearly still enjoying the idea. Well, it is something to think about, no? Jen had a suggestion of her own to offer. Or you could finally solve the John F. Kennedy assassination. I always wondered about that, like, with all the weird facts that don't add up and all the conspiracy theories. Although, she frowned and her eyes went distant. The feds might be even more pissed off about that than they would be about Roswell. Damn. Before Kera could reply, Jen saw one of her customers trying to wave her over and hurried to help him, leaving the conversation behind for the time being. Still, the other seemed to expect Kera to address what Jen had said. Well, she began, I don't think I'm qualified to investigate the JFK incident, at least not yet. But maybe later when I hit the big leagues. Plus, aren't they supposed to declassify some of the information on that soon? Stephanie nodded. My grandmother was hoping she'd live long enough to find out the truth about all that, but I don't know if she'll make it. Damn shame. Kevin, the owner, had wandered toward them midway into the discussion. Kera suspected he had other things to do, but he obviously wanted to hear what they were talking about and make a contribution or two of his own. He was a tall man, though he tended to slouch when standing, in his early 30s, and less self-assertive than he ought to be. His confidence had improved, though, since he'd begun dating an extremely attractive woman, with Kira's, Jen's, and Stephanie's help, a month or so ago. Hey now, he said, leave Kira alone. No need to prod her into doing stuff she's going to get in trouble for. Jen, returning to their vicinity as she grabbed a fresh glass, remarked, Well, that's no fun. Waving the comment off, Kevin continued. It's best to start small with things you know you can handle but will still make you look good. When you're a new business owner, that's how you build a foundation for expanding your business later. Take on jobs you're proud of and treat your clients and customers the best you can. Word will get around and you'll have stuff you can brag about later when more people start getting interested. Speaking of which, he turned around and shuffled back to his office. Kira rubbed her chin. He's right. Granted, she coughed, remembering her cover story of getting an internship. It's not really my business, not yet, but still, I might be able to make suggestions to the owners or pick and choose which cases I work on. I'll keep that in mind. Focus on what I'm good at and use that as a stepping stone to bigger and better things. The conversation trailed on as Kira finished her beer and pretzels. Then everyone else went back to work. Stephanie seemed too busy for Kira to be able to pull her aside, unfortunately, so she resigned herself to having to speak in code over a text message and wait till later to talk to her in person about what was going on. As she got ready to leave, dropping her tab plus a generous tip on the counter for Jen, Kevin appeared again and motioned her to come to his office. What's up? She asked. I don't have another partial paycheck coming, do I? He scratched his nose. Nice try, but no. I was just wondering, for my own conscience, I guess, did you decide to leave us because of the lower hours you were getting? I hope I didn't do the wrong thing by letting the other girls kind of pressure you into being the one who always went home early. Kira hadn't expected the question, but Kevin was the type of man she could see worrying about something like that. Before she could answer him, however, he spoke again. Wait, or is it because of what happened when that asshole shot your bike because I wouldn't cooperate with him? God, I still feel bad about that. This place's reputation is improving again, but I don't think I'll ever live down that period when we were the local bucket of blood tavern or whatever. Ugh. Kira held up her hands, palms toward him. No, nothing like that. Really, Kevin. But I appreciate you asking. Besides, you paid to have my bike fixed. You didn't have to do that. Thanks again. It's only because, well, I want to move on and do other things. You didn't do anything wrong. This is probably the best place I've worked so far. He sighed in blatant relief, wiped his brow, and hazarded a smile. Oh, good. That takes a load off my shoulders. Seriously. Well, I'm not going to lie. I'm sad to lose you, but I understand. Slinging drinks isn't everyone's permanent calling in life, and you stuck with me through the roughest period we ever had. Now, things are turning back around. We're a respectable establishment again, and business is picking up. Good. She laid a hand on his shoulder. I wish you the best, and I promise I'll continue to stop in at least Once in a while. I won't make promises as to exactly how often, but I'll make an effort since I don't live too far away. We'll keep in touch." It went without saying that Stephanie would act as the messenger, given that she would continue working there. Kevin agreed. "Okay, great. Well, I have to get back to the boring number-crunching stuff. You're going to have all kinds of fun once you start doing that at your new place, I'm sure. At a startup, you're going to wear many hats, but I know you're up to it. Best of luck." She gave him a hug, which seemed to embarrass him, then turned and left. On her way out, she caught Stephanie between tables and told her, "I'll talk to you more later this evening." Steph nodded and hurried off. Frowning, Kera contemplated helping her friend with her tables, but felt as though it would be somehow inappropriate since she was no longer on the payroll, and the customers might be perturbed to have some strange biker chick suddenly grab their empty dishes. Pushing it out of her mind, she left the bar behind and found her ride in the back lot. Z stood on his kickstand in the same parking space Kera had always used as an employee next to Kevin's truck. He was a Kawasaki Z900 and as spotless and smoothly maintained as when he was new. The two of them had been through a lot together, and she rewarded him with proper maintenance whenever she had the time. And now that she was technically unemployed, she had more time than ever. "Okay, Z," she said, putting her helmet back on. "Time to go home and get started on the next phase of our lives." Kera revved the engine and sped into the street, merging with the usual heavy LA traffic and weaving around it when she could. Driving relaxed her, even when the streets were congested. Her mind wandered. She had expected to come away from the Mermaid in a bittersweet, sentimental frame of mind. Good months had been spent in that place, with good people, and she was leaving them behind. It was her one remaining link to a normal life, and it was gone, barring sporadic visits. She was on her own. But it meant that she was free. Her inheritance was in the process of clearing. A large amount like that had understandably flagged eyes at the banks, but it would be hers soon, and she would have as long as she needed to get her agency up and running. As she drew closer to the warehouse she had converted into her home, she recalled that there was still one lingering problem: her alter ego. First order of business, she promised herself, is getting rid of the motorcycle man phenomenon once and for all. Fame has its perks, but it will be nice to be free of that, too. Chapter 2. James Lovecraft and Mother LeBlanc sat on one side of the dining table, and their student Azudo sat opposite them. The sun was streaming through the eastern window, so they hadn't bothered to turn on any electric lights as they ate their omelets and toast, washed down with coffee and orange juice. James swallowed a mouthful of his food. "All right," he began, pointing his fork at Azudo. "You're doing well, and I mean that. I know it's rough. Normally, we don't push our recruits this hard, but, well, you've already heard all this anyway." "Yes," Azudo confirmed, trying not to sigh too obviously. "I have." He assumed James was summing things up in this fashion as a prelude to some momentous announcement. Nodding, James went on to say, "So, currently the plan is to, well, continue the plan. Since you made up your mind that you were totally on board with us and our organization's mission, I would say that your progress and performance have improved. You're on the verge of pulling ahead. If you do outpace the schedule, we may be able to afford to give you a short break from time to time. But the one thing we cannot and will not do is to fall behind schedule, no matter what." He glanced at Mother LeBlanc, giving her the opportunity to add any comments of her own. She was far older than James, though she looked younger than he did, if anything. She could have overridden his decisions if she wanted to, but she tended to allow him to take the lead where the subject of Azudo was concerned. "I agree," she stated. "If things continue as they are, all should be well." She reached into the folds of her diaphanous, multicolored dress and pulled out a pepper shaker, upended it over her omelet until it was coated with black sprinkles, then put it back where she had found it. Azudo wondered if she would ever divulge the secret of how she always managed to produce exactly what she needed or wanted from the strange garment. He didn't have high hopes on that front, however. Even James was confused by the dress, and if he didn't understand it, what chance did Azudo have? Azudo gave a vague nod and returned to his breakfast. He was somehow disappointed, having expected a new development or a strange reversal. No, he told himself. I have agreed to remain here of my own free will and have told them I believe in the role they have set for me. Magic is much too powerful to be allowed in the hands of fools and renegades. My yearnings for freedom and action are as nothing compared to the greater needs of the world. Was it not the betterment of our society that led me to wander the world to begin with? Ever since he had fled the Nigerian village of his boyhood, he had drifted around, sometimes on jobs for the United Nations or various nonprofit charitable organizations, other times for himself. He rarely stayed in one place for more than 2 or 3 months at a time. But after these two had come to him in Geneva, he had somewhat grudgingly agreed to be trained by them in the arts of thaumaturgy over the course of an entire year. And though it had not been stated outright, he had serious doubts that he would be allowed to leave James's estate during the whole of that period. They were a strange pair, his teachers. James Lovecraft was an average-looking white man in his middle 30s with glasses and short side-parted hair. He resembled an accountant or a computer programmer, rather than the incredibly powerful magician he was. In contrast, Mother LeBlanc looked the part, though Azudo suspected she was at least a century old. She had the appearance of a beautiful black woman of perhaps 25. She had a mysterious air of dignity and formality in her mannerisms, a Creole accent, made references to the traditions of New Orleans, and, of course, there was her outlandish dress. Azudo was about to ask what today's lessons would be, when a faint electronic bell sound came from James' laptop, which he had left open on the edge of the table. Ah, James acknowledged the alert. Someone sent us a message, probably a magical one, though it might simply be a mundane piece of spam or a promotional offer or some crap like that. A couple of years ago, he explained to Azudo, I figured out how to route psionic messages to my email. Makes life far simpler to be able to read those things at my own leisure rather than have them pop directly into my head when, for example, I'm trying to enjoy my breakfast. Azudo chuckled as James turned his fork back to his eggs, though his curiosity had been piqued. I take it the messages from the council, he offered. Psionic messages, from what I have read, are not a beginner's spell. Perhaps, James shrugged, apparently indifferent. Mother LeBlanc pursed her lips and turned a critical eye on her partner. Really, James, you have become far too reliant upon technology. The reason these gadgets exist is to act as a crutch for people who do not possess the gift of magical aptitude. By letting your inbox field your messages for you, you are acting like a man with functional legs who uses crutches because he is too lazy to walk. There was something playful in her tone, and James, who had worked with her for years, snorted. Hilarious. What are we to make, then, of you being too lazy to walk over to the counter and get the pepper shaker from there? Oh, no, you had to conjure one out of your dress. LeBlanc waved a hand. That is the complete opposite of the point I was trying to make. However, it was a nice effort on your part to turn my criticism back on me, albeit one that failed miserably. Now, are you going to end the suspense of this mysterious message? Or will I have to stoop to reading your email for you? Grumbling, James set down his fork and turned the laptop toward him, examining the message with eyes that suddenly went from dull and complacent to wide with alarm. Azudo tensed, sensing something was wrong. LeBlanc did likewise. The vibe of shock and danger all but electrified the air. What is it? Azudo asked. He wondered if it was something to do with him. Perhaps the council was objecting to his independent experiments with scrying on Motorcycle Woman or wishing to change his training schedule. But obscurely, he knew it was worse than that. James's mouth fell open, but it took another couple of seconds before he could speak. His skin had grown pale and clammy. He began in a hollow voice as LeBlanc moved in beside him and put a hand on his arm. We are being challenged for control of the North American continent. And by we, I mean the council. What? LeBlanc snapped at a startling volume. Who dares? Azuto felt his stomach sink as he watched and listened. James swallowed. Oh, I think I can get...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?